morning, boys and girls. I understand you're from the 5th grade in the Steinhauer School. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, we're very happy to have you come and be with us this morning and learn a little bit about the first school in Maple Shade, and also to see some pictures that we have of old Maple Shade, or Maple Shade in the past. But let me tell you first about the school. It was built in 1812, which is quite a long time ago. And it was the only school in the area, and people came to this school from way down beyond Haddonfield Road, from way over beyond Fork Landing Bridge, and most of them walked. But then, of course, school wasn't a full year like yours is, and the children came to school when there were no farm chores to be done, because this was all farmland. And so the school was here, the only school in the area, for 97 years. And that's when Maple Shade began to grow, and there was a school built up on Poplar Avenue. Now, our little building here presently is the property of the township, Maple Shade Township. The township takes care of the ground around the building. But the Maple Shade Historical Society maintains the building. By that, we heat it, we light it, and we do any repairs. And of course, when we first took it over back in 1956, it was a pretty sad looking building. There's a picture on the back wall of how it looked when it was first taken over. And of course, the Historical Society has done a great deal. They've fixed the floor, put in a new ceiling, put on a new roof, put in the lights, and put in heat. So that our Historical Society here in Maple Shade is very anxious to preserve one of the oldest buildings in Maple Shade. Now, I want to show you this flag, and you tell me how it's different from the flag you have in your classroom. How is it different?
It doesn't have 50 stars.
No, it doesn't. How many does it have? How many?
13.
Oh, are you sure?
Of course.
How many?
16.
15 stars. All right, is there anything different about the stripes? Yes. How many?
15.
There are 15 stripes. Now, what does that mean? There are 15 stars and 15 stripes on this flag. Does anyone know what that means? Because this is the flag that would have been used when the school was first opened. What?
There was only 15 states.
Right. There were 15 states at that time in 1812. And in those days, you see, they added a star and a stripe. That wouldn't be possible today, would it? So they just add stars. Well, but this is the 1812 flag. All right, now I think we're ready to look at our pictures. The picture on the left is what our main street looked like 83 years ago, or in 1900, 1901. The trolley car ran out from Camden to Maple Shade to Moorestown. There were tracks on each side of the street, and so there you see one of the first trolleys. Notice that there are a lot of trees and not many houses. The picture on the right is the way the street looks today, taken from the same spot. So that's what we mean by Maple Shade past and present. Now, it's a little hard for us to think of Maple Shade lying between the two branches of the Pennsylvania Creek. You see, here's the branch that is off in this direction. Here's the branch that we cross over when we go to the Moose Creek. This is the north branch of the Pennsylvania. This is the south branch of the Pennsylvania. Of course, this is what we where the Pennsauken comes together. There was an Indian village with a name that I can't pronounce, but it sounded a little bit like Simonson, which is a name we now use, and our historians tell us that the name Pennsauken also came from that word. And when you read history, you'll find Pennsauken spelled ever so many ways, because folks just spell it the way it sounded to them. But Maple Shade lies between the two branches of the Pennsauken. One was an Indian village. It's also very hard to remember that many, many years ago, New Jersey was covered with water. And as the water receded, it left a layer of clay called the Merchantville strata. And in that clay, people have been able to find little fossils. That clay was up back of the public service garage. There's a slope up there, and that was part of the Merchantville strata of clay that was 70 million years old. And so one day when we were up there, we found a man digging for fossils, and he had found this little clam shell which had turned to stone. And then he also found another interesting little piece of material. What it was, we don't know, but he was going to take it into the Philadelphia Academy of Natural Sciences, and they would tell him more about it. So you see, this part of our state goes back a long, long way. Well, what about that clay that was left when the waters receded? Well, it provided work for a great many people in Maple Shade for over 100 years. That clay was used in making bricks right here in Maple Shade. Started back in 1846, which is 150 years ago. Well, these pictures were taken later right here in Maple Shade, and it shows you how bricks were made of this 70 million year old clay. The little engine went down into the clay pits, and the machinery loaded those little trucks that you see in back of it with the clay. And the clay was taken up to the forming sheds, where the bricks were cut into the proper size. And then the raw bricks were taken out into the kiln yard, where they were packed into a kiln. And you can see there is a kiln being fired in the background. Now this is all where the industrial park is up on 73 now. So you see everything of this is gone. But these raw bricks were packed into one of those big dome-shaped kilns, and then the openings closed and fires set around the edge with charcoal or coke. And then after 8 days, the bricks had turned a nice baked red. They were brought out of the kiln, taken into the stack yard, and there you see another of those dome-shaped kilns in the background. And there were special trucks that were used to carry the bricks away. Now I'm sure you all know where the town of Colwick is, just down across the creek. Well, most of those houses were built with maple shade bricks. But the time came when that clay ran out, and so the bricks are no longer made in Maple Shade. It is a forgotten industry, you might say. Now, the first family to come in this area back in 1682, and that's why I say Maple Shade is 300 years old, there was the Roberts family, John and Sarah Roberts. And they had a huge plantation that went all the way from the North Branch to the South Branch. And today, our main street runs right through what was the Roberts plantation. Another family that came were the Matlacks. And the third William Matlack built this house. You see, his father was William, his grandfather was William, his father was William, and he was William. So he didn't, the folks came in 1683, but he didn't get to build this house until 1753, which was quite a few years later. Well, this house doesn't look like that now. See, it has been changed. It has been put back to what they think it looked like originally. And this is the oldest house in Maple Shade, the William Matlack house. Do any of you recognize it? Know where it is? Out on Route 73? Have you seen it back of all those tall trees? It's the oldest house in Maple Shade. And here is another old house, built in 1769. It's up on McCrae Lane. It was built by the third Isaac Stiles. And the interesting thing about this house is that building on the right-hand side that has a cupola on it. That was the ice house. And in the winter, this ice house was built with a deep cellar. In the winter, they would go down to the north branch of the Pennsauken Creek and cut huge blocks of ice, bring it up and put it in the cellar of this building with packed in sawdust. And that was their refrigeration for all summer long. And you see, as the ice melted, it just sort of settled down into the earth floor of this building. Well, later on, the occupants made it into a garage, and if you would go up and look at it today, I think that building is a kitchen. But that is the Stiles House, 1769, the second oldest house in Maple Shade. And here's our little red school, the one that was built in 1812 and was the only school for 97 years. When Maple Shade began to grow, the little red schoolhouse no longer was adequate because there were too many boys and girls. There was a school built on North Cutler Avenue. At first, only 2 rooms. Then, in just a few years, because so many people were moving in with their children from the city, they had to build 2 more rooms. And if you would go up on North Cutler Avenue, you would still see this part of the school standing. Some of the other parts have been taken down. And look at this. This was the principal, Miss Priscilla Gardner, and these were the boys and girls of one of the first classes in the new school. Look, all the girls have hair ribbons. All the boys have jackets and ties. This was the older group. The school went to 5th grade. Then after that, the boys and girls went to Moorestown School. And this was the 1st and 2nd grade. And the teacher was Miss May Johnson. So those pictures were taken at the first school that was used after this one was used. This isn't a very clear picture, but this is the first station that was built when the railroad came through Maple Shade. In 1864, the very first station was built up at Stiles Avenue. Well, then it wasn't too long before they built a station out here at Fork Landing Road. And you see the funny little old engine over there coming down the track. There are no houses around at all. This was more than 100 years ago. And then a bigger station was built about 1900. And then in 1976, you weren't very old then, but the JCs painted it all up in red, white, and blue in celebration of the bicentennial. And it looked very nice. Today, it doesn't look very good because it has graffiti on it and things have been torn apart. Folks just haven't let it alone so that it could remain attractive. It's a pity. Now, this is the original Chester Township that was organized in 1664. And that is all of Chester Township and includes Moorestown. But in 1922, Maple Shade and Moorestown separated so that just one end of Chester Township was known as Chester Township. We kept the name Chester Township because it was old, and Moorestown took Moorestown Township for their name. You see, here's the railroad, here's our main street, North Fork Landing Road, Coles Avenue, Mill Road, Township Road. And these are the people who lived there in 1876. So you see, there weren't too many people. There were only 9 houses the other side of the railroad. There were 2 blacksmith shops. But there weren't very many people living in Maple Shade 100 years ago. But that is the part. And there you can see the 2 branches of the Pennsauken making the boundary lines of our township. And here's another picture of where folks lived in 1876. And you can see the streams there and just a few roads. Our very first grocery store was built in 1884, which is 100 years ago. The Farr family came here and built this house. They lived across the street for a while, but then they built this big house, and the store was the front part of the house, as was the custom in those days. And so when the house was all finished and it was ready to be moved into during the blizzard of '88. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard about the blizzard of '88, but there was snow and snow and snow and more snow. We haven't seen anything like it since then. But that's when the family moved into this. Today, this is what you see there. The house and store are all gone, and Kramarski's furniture store is there. The very first church in Maple Shade was this Episcopal church up at very close to your school, right on the corner of Fellowship Road and Main Street. You see, it's a wooden church. Well, within 5 years after it was built in 1890, it burned. And in a short time, they built the second church over on Linwood Avenue, and this time they built it of brick. So this is the very first church to be in Maple Shade, and this was all before 1900. Our first policeman was Clarence Ward. He was a great, big, fine person, and he was our only policeman. He worked at night, and he would go riding around town on a bicycle or on his horse, and sometimes he plowed our streets for us with his horse and plow. He was a very fine policeman, but we had just one policeman. And he lived in a house that stood on Muir-Steinhauer Playground, back toward the railroad. The house had been moved from down the main street. You know, there's a cute story. When Mr. Ward would be out patrolling at night, if there would be a telephone call for him, the only way his wife could then get in touch with him was to go out on the porch and blow a horn. She had a cornet, and that's how she could tell him that you and I, and he knew that he was needed. Well, today, you see, we have some 30 policemen and quite a few very fine-looking vehicles. Our police force has grown with our time. Now, when the trolley came, there were people in Philadelphia who wanted to come to the country. They wanted to have a little farm. They wanted their children to be out in the country. So the Edith Cutler Company bought up some of the farms around, divided it into lots here in the center of town, quarter acres, half acres, and that is how much it cost, $150 to $300 an acre. And all you had to put down was $5. And it was only 7 miles from Camden and 23 minutes by train, has good trolley service. They really made it sound as though it was very fine. And that is why so many people came, and that's why the Little Red Schoolhouse no longer was adequate. So many people came and brought their children, and new schools had to be built. Our road, our main street out here, wasn't much of a road when it was first opened, and this probably was one of the first buildings to be built on this new road. But later on, it was gravelled and widened, and that cost money. So in 1850, it became a turnpike. And so when you came by in your horse and wagon, you had to stop at the toll gate and pay 3 cents. Now, there was a toll gate up where you're very close to your school, and that was for the folks going to Camden. They had to stop there and pay 3 cents. This one was the one where you're coming toward Moorestown into Maple Shade, because that's down at Coles Avenue. Well, the farmers found out that if they could go out up on Stiles Avenue and down along the railroad and come out on Coles Avenue, they could get away with not paying that 3 cents. That tells you how valuable 3 pennies were in those days, that they would go to all that trouble not to pay 3 cents. But this was one of our original toll gates on the turnpike. And at the time the turnpike was built in 1850, there were mile markers put all the way along from Camden to Moorestown. Now you see this side says 7 miles to Camden, and the other side says 2 miles to Moorestown. There are 2 of those posts still remaining here in Maple Shade, one down toward the bridge in this direction, and there are still 2 in Moorestown of these old posts that were put there way over 100 years ago. Now this is the way our main street looked in 1912. You can see it doesn't look like it does now, because there were no sidewalks, and on the side where the post office is, you can see a fence, and that went down into sort of a swamp. And the house that you see over on the right-hand side is now the jewelry store, and the other houses on up the way are, well, town crier and the real estate and the barber shop, and all of those houses had fronts built on them, and that's the way our street would look today. And here's that other picture of the trolley. The house you see in the distance is a freight house, and the house closer to the edge of the picture is the second grocery store in Maple Shade, Menel's store. It's now the Red Carpet Lounge. And that's the way that the street looks now from that place. Trolley tracks are gone, we have buses in place. And this is our first fire engine. It was a little red wagon built in a wagon shop here in Maple Shade. And whenever the gong sounded, the first fellow to come with a horse to pull the wagon got $2. So, and then we got automobiles for fire engines. And then later on, we have that beautiful firehouse and all of the wonderful firefighting equipment that we have here in Maple Shade today. This was our first drugstore back in 1918. It's where Dr. Squires has his office now, right on the corner of Fourth Landing and Main Street. And look, this was the movie. This was the movie where all the kids in the town went Saturday afternoon to see Wild West shows. Actually, it had a very grand name of the palace, but all of the youngsters called it the Red Onion. And you know, I wasn't allowed to go because my folks thought it might fall down. You go into your kitchen, turn on the water, think nothing of it. But in days gone by, even when I lived here, we got our water at my house from this windmill. When the wind blew, you had water. When it didn't, you had problems. And then later on, the township built the waterworks that's up by the North Branch, and the main building looks something like this. Trouble between Mapleshade and Morristown over various problems brought about the beginning of the Mapleshade Progress. A man by the name of Brown published it, and it had some questions for the Township Committee about why we didn't have some street lights and why our roads weren't being improved and so forth. And that was back in 1916. So you see our Mapleshade Progress still exists for more than 66 years. And this was the house that we saw in one of the other pictures. And this is the bank that stands there on that corner today. Now our first ambulance. Can you imagine? And those were the three drivers. Our very first ambulance. But look what we have today. A beautiful first aid building with 4 of the most wonderfully equipped ambulances that any town could have. And there's that store that you saw before, Menel's store, that I told you now is the Red Carpet Lounge. And if you go around back, you can look up at the roofs and see the original roof lines of a number of these houses that are along there. And they date back to 1849. Oh, I should back up and tell you, and this was our first post office. The post office was originally in the station. Then it moved to this building, and then it moved to a building on South Fort Landing Road, and then it moved to the one that perhaps you remember at Main and Margaret, and now we have our brand new post office. So you see, with Mapleshade's growth, many things have changed. Now, I thought you might like to see these. At the bicentennial, which was in 1976, 200 years, we had a group of first, second, third, and fourth graders come with their teacher to the school here, and they spent the whole day having school the way children might have had it when they came here. You see, they wore their little colonial costumes. And there's the little girl with her slate, because pencils and paper and that sort of thing were not available. And of course, she was willing. But that was for when people pulled pigtails or did other things that were teasing. And finally the teacher had said, that is enough. You go to the corner. And then they had to wear the little dunce hat. And here are some of the children reciting their lessons. You see, the teacher was in her colonial costume also. So, the end of the day for these little kiddos who had spent the day in a colonial school in their colonial costumes. And this is the end of our pictures. Now, I think probably you might have some questions. Any questions about Mapleshade or about your school? Well, I must have covered it pretty thoroughly. Yes. I don't hear you because it doesn't.
There's a big tree on North Forkland Road.
There certainly is.
How old is it?
I think, judging by other trees that I have seen, that it would be several hundred years old. And North Fork Landing Road was laid out from the main road in the very, very early 1800s, and it went back to a landing on the south branch. And the farmers would take their products back Fork Landing Road to a landing back there, and then they would put them on boats and take them out the creek, and either up the Delaware to Burlington or down the Delaware to Philadelphia. And there they would exchange their farm products for things that their plantations didn't produce. And of course that would be salt and sugar and things that maybe a piece of furniture that had come from England. Lovely little things that they might have extra money to buy. But their plantations and their farms were mostly the things that provided their life, because they raised crops that would feed them and their animals. They raised vegetables, fruit. They had bees to make honey, and of course they had their sheep for the wool. So there were many things that these people had to do for themselves, and that we just trot off to the 5 and 10 or the supermarket or to the mall and buy. Think nothing of it. But those people had so many things that they had to do for themselves. Any other questions? That was a good one. And there's quite a large tree here on North Coles Avenue, a great big oak. It isn't anywhere near as big as the one on North Fork Landing Road, but it's a very large tree, and I would think it would be quite old. And Coles Avenue, the one that goes south, was laid out in the early 1800s too, and that went over to the old Marlton Pike. That was a way of getting to another part. Yes?
Where Cambridge Circle is.
I beg your pardon?
Cambridge Circle.
Canford?
Cambridge Circle.
Cambridge Circle?
Yeah.
Where is that now?
It's over near, it's near Coles.
Would it be what we call Harwood Circle, where there's a firehouse and... No. Cambridge Circle?
You know where Windsor is?
I know where the Windsor Diner is. Oh, in the Park Estates. Well, I can tell you something interesting about that too. You live in Park Estates?
I live in,
Well, a long time ago, before this road was put through, there was a road that went over back of the high school and across Coles Avenue and down through Alden Park on Rose Avenue, called the Market Road. Originally, everybody had to use the King's Highway and go to Haddonfield and then go to Camden. Well, this road that went across the back of Maple Shade and sort of followed the creek and crossed the creek down here on a dam was called the Market Road, and it was a shortcut for the farmers to take their things to market. Any other questions? Yes?
I have a question. Being a historian, would you say that history is just facts that we study in school, or is it something that we do every day?
Well, we're living history because we're living in a place where folks lived 300 years ago, lived in a very different way. And I think when we think of all the advantages we have today, I'm not sure we would want to trade places with those folks who lived here 300 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, because we have so many advantages here now in our schools and our transportation and our recreation and so forth. Any other questions? Okay, I think your bus is very near to coming. A lot of this
Oh no. Hi, Mom.
You can speak if you wish.
Hi, Mom.
it's down here.
You ready?
There now.
Okay, one more time. Feel free to speak and say anything you want, okay?
I'm on TV. Must be a dream. Hi, Mommy. Must be on a dream. Hi, Mom.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, boys and girls. We're very happy to have Mrs. Summers, 4th grade, from the North Fork Landing Road School visit our little red schoolhouse this morning. For our program, we are going to tell you something about when the little schoolhouse was built, how it's been used, and how it is being used presently. The little schoolhouse was built in 1812. I suspect if you would have subtracted 12 from 83, you might get 71, and 18 from 19. So this little building is 171 years old. It's not the oldest building in Maple Shade, but it's one of the oldest buildings. And it was the first schoolhouse anywhere in the area. The boys and girls came here from down beyond Haddonfield Road, way back by Fort Landing Bridge, and most of them walked that distance. There were no school buses. And but the thing of it was, school didn't last anywhere near as long as it does for you folks, because the boys and girls had to work on the plantations and on the farms. And when it was crop season, there wasn't any school. There was school when there wasn't chores for the boys and girls on the farms and plantations. So there were just a few months of school. But this was the only school in the area for 97 years. And that's when Maple Shade began to grow. And 2 rooms were built up where the Elizabeth Haig School was. There's still a brick building there. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. And then, of course, the Steinhauer School was built, and the Mill Road School, and the North Fork Landing School, and finally our high school, which tells us how much Maple Shade has grown since 1909, when this school was last used as a school. And all 8 grades were in here at first. Then, as the town began to grow a little, the first 5 grades were here. And then when you got to 6th grade, you got on the trolley and went to Morristown for 6th, 7th, and 8th and high school. Well, today, you see, the little school is used quite differently. After it was no longer used as a school, people lived here. They built additions. They had a different kind of a porch. They had something on the back. And it was a barber shop and a shoemaker's shop. But the time came when the last person who lived here couldn't pay his taxes. So the little school turned back to the township. And then the Maple Shade Historical Society was organized in 1956. So today, the township owns the property, and the township mows the lawn, but the Historical Society takes care of the building. So whenever anything needs to be done, the Historical Society does it. We've had the floor fixed, we've had a new ceiling put in the building, we've had the lights, we've had heat put in. There's been an awful lot to do to that little building that you see back there in the picture. It was not in very good condition when we took it over, and so a lot has been done, and a lot still has to be done. But the way it's used now is so that you can see how a one-room school might have looked, but we're also gathering things here that people used in their homes, on their farms, in their shops during the time the school was opened. I'm going to show you this before we ask you your question. Is it different? How? How is it different?
It doesn't have 50 stars.
No, it doesn't. How many does it have? How many?
13?
Are you sure?
50.
How many?
15.
15. Look at the stripes. How many?
15.
15 stripes and 15 stars. What do you suppose that means?
That there are 15 colonies.
Well, they were not colonies anymore after the Revolution, but they were states, weren't they? There were 15 states when this little school was built. And notice that when they added a star for a state, they also added a stripe. Can we do that nowadays? No, we just add stars. So this is the flag that would have flown in front of the school when it was first opened. Now, to ask you the question. What happens at your house when the electricity goes off?
The TV, the radio, and the lights don't work.
Oh my, the TV, the radio, and the lights do not work. All right, what else? Is that all?
The stove.
If you have an electric stove, you don't cook. Yes.
The heating and the air conditioning.
Oh, indeed. Your heater has an electric switch on it so that you're cold. And if it's summer, your air conditioner goes off and you're hot. All right, what else? What else? Yes.
The fan.
A fan goes off, right? Who else? Well, now, suppose Mother was baking something and she was making a cake. What would quit?
The mixer.
Her mixer would quit, wouldn't it? All right. Suppose it were Saturday morning and you had your housework to do.
Vacuum sweeper.
Your vacuum sweeper wouldn't work. What else wouldn't work? Suppose it were Monday or Tuesday. What else wouldn't work?
Electric toothbrush.
Every morning. Electric toothbrush. All right, there's something else very important that wouldn't work. What?
Your refrigerator.
Good. Just think. All this food that you're keeping nice and cold. That's, the refrigerator doesn't work anymore.
Didn't have cars.
What else wouldn't work? What do you have in your utility room?
Hair dryer.
All right. We have to be beautiful.
Washer. Dryer.
There you go. Your washer and your dryer wouldn't work. And sometimes everything isn't permanent press.
Your iron.
Your iron wouldn't work. Did you ever realize how much we depend on electricity? Now, my big question is, what did people do before there was electricity? What did they do? What?
Use candles.
They did indeed. They used candles. And that's probably what you have at your house in case the lights do go off. But there was something else that people used. What? A lantern. This, you see, had some coal oil down here in the tank, and it has a wick in here, and you could raise this globe up and light the wick with a match. And then when you went out at night, you carried this lantern with you so that you wouldn't step in a mud puddle or you wouldn't stub your toe on a stone. There weren't any street lights. And in many cases, there weren't any sidewalks. So you were very glad to have a lantern to carry along with you if you went out at night. And in your house, you had an oil lamp. Now this globe here was filled with coal oil, and this has a wick, as you can see. The globe comes off so that you could light the wick, and then you put it back on, and you had a light. This was the sort of the one that you would use in a bedroom. There were bigger ones that you used in your sitting room or in your dining room. Yes?
Like, if you're washing or drying, or if you just wash your clothes.
You wash your own clothes, and do you know how they did it?
With the sweatboard.
Yes. Look at this. That is a washboard, and I think we've had a friend with us. You had a big wooden tub. In fact, you had two. You had your wash water in one, and this washboard went in, and then the other tub had your rinse water in. And here you took your clothes. See, the soap rested up on this little ledge, and you took your clothes and you scrubbed away. It wasn't an easy job, but that's the way folks washed their clothes. Well, then later on, there were washers that you ran by hand. You put the clothes in, you put the water in, and then you went back and forth, and it had a wringer. Bit by bit, things got easier until now we have our electric washers and dryers. And somebody said, well, your electric iron wouldn't work. And this is what people used. These were the first irons. You can see they're very heavy. Would you look? Don't drop it. Yes. Well, this was put on the stove and heated. And Mother usually had a holder to put around because the handle got awful hot too. And so she would have several of these, and she would use this until it got cool, and then she'd set it back on the stove and take the other one and keep on ironing. And she rotated them that way. Well, things began to get better, and this is what some later mothers had. Now you see, this handle didn't get hot because it comes off. You had several of these, and you put them on the top of your coal stove to get warm, and then you just used the same handle, and when you needed to start in, why, you simply ironed until the heat went out, and then you took your handle off and got another one. And of course, somebody got the idea that you should have an iron stand, then it wouldn't burn the cover on your ironing board. It's interesting how things improved. And now, of course, we have our electric irons with steam and all sorts of gadgets on the iron to make things pleasant for us. All right, now what else did we say? Oh, somebody said something that reminded me that I should show you these. Now, what do you think these were used for? What?
That looks like it was something like a fly swatter.
A fly swatter. Oh, poor fly. But if you didn't hit him right, he could go right through that hole.
Oh, yeah.
What else? Yes?
A rug beater?
It certainly is. It's a rug beater. Both of them are rug beaters. And this is what you did. Instead of getting your vacuum out and going over it so easily and nicely, you took the carpet, you moved all the furniture, took the carpet up off the floor, took it out in the backyard, and hung it over a line. And then you beat the dust out of it. That's the way carpets were cleaned before we had electricity and a vacuum cleaner. All right. Oh, I know. Somebody said your refrigerator wouldn't work. What did people do before you had electric refrigerators? Yes.
Kept their food in an ice box.
They certainly did. And where did they get the ice? Where?
From the ice house.
From the ice house?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Where else?
The iceman.
The iceman came around with a horse and wagon. And if you had a big refrigerator, you got a big piece of ice. You had a small refrigerator, you got a small piece of ice. And this is the way the iceman brought it in for you. See, he would cut the piece of ice that you wanted, and then he would go and catch it that way, and then he would carry it in and put it in your refrigerator for you. These are ice tongs. And I suppose they used something like this even in colonial days when they cut the ice out of the creek and put it in their ice houses for the summer. So that's what would happen with that. Then somebody said if Mother were mixing a cake, her mixer wouldn't work. And this is what folks used long ago, before they had electric mixers. Maybe Father even sat by the fire or the fireplace and carved that out of a piece of wood for Mother. And here's what she beat her cakes with, you see. But I'm questioning, how was this used? How? Oh, that certainly is. But what was underneath? What was underneath? What?
Meat?
Maybe. What?
Maybe potato?
Surely. This is a potato masher. And you mashed your potatoes and then you put the milk and butter in and stirred it up. But just think how you do it now. Does your mother do it with an electric mixer? Or does she have one that has a wire thing? Well, that's how that was used. Now, there's some other things here I'd like to show you that have to do with the school. When school was ready to call and all the boys and girls were out playing, the teacher went to the door and, are you ready for this? And that's how you knew when it was time to come back into school and get settled down and go to work again. And the first boys and girls who came to the school, of course, paper and pencils were unknown. And every boy and girl who came to school had to have a slate and a slate pencil. And you see back of this there is a blackboard, and back of this there's a blackboard. The teacher could put the lessons on the board, and then the boys and girls could copy down their arithmetic. And maybe somebody over in first grade who's just learning to add 1 and 1, a fifth grader could come over and say, well, that's right, you did it well. But you could do your spelling lesson on here, and your arithmetic lesson. And of course, in those days, you know, the things that they taught in school were reading, writing, arithmetic. Those were the things to be mastered. Nowadays, we have art and science and physical education, all sorts of interesting things for school. But in those days, since school wasn't in session as long as yours, that was the main thing, to learn to spell, to write, to read, and to do your arithmetic. And later on, the first pens, of course, you made your own ink. And Father made you a pen by taking a feather from a goose's wing, and then he would cut it down very carefully and split it, and that would carry the ink. Then later on, much better pens were made. They were wooden pen holders, and you see, you could change the pen. You could buy a whole box of these little steel pens, and when one wasn't working, you took it out and put in a new one. And now what do you use to write with?
Pencils.
Huh? Pencils and pens, yes. You just take the cap off and write. There's no problem to it. And since everybody had to buy their own things, they took care to keep them in good shape. So here is what is called a school companion. Did you have one? I do, of course. See, it holds the pencils, holds other little things down in here, has a place for an eraser. And if you were real fussy, it had a key and you could lock it. Now, you said that your heater or your air conditioner would go off. All right. How did people heat their homes before they had oil or gas heaters? Huh? They burned wood in a, what? In a stove. Well, of course, when our first people came, they burned wood in a fireplace, but later on stoves. And so we have a little potbelly stove back here. This is not the original stove of this school, but it's very like the one that was here. And you know, if the stove stood there, your teachers and the folks over in that corner wouldn't be very warm. So the stove, of course, stood in the middle of the room. And then everybody got the benefit of the heat. And of course, this stove burns coal. And of course, you burn the coal, and it gives you a nice, steady heat. But then, of course, you have to take out the ashes and get rid of those. But this is what we call a potbelly stove. Here's a lifter to take off the lid, put in, and you can always keep a tea kettle on here with nice hot water to make tea. So that it was very convenient. That's how you kept your house warm. Now, what about your bedrooms? You have very nice, warm, woolen quilts. No electric blankets on your bed. So when folks needed quilts for the winter, they made them of wool. You see, all of this is wool that's left over from clothing that was made, and then it is even lined with wool. So this would, and it's a great big one, so it goes clear over the edge of the bed. So you see, this was a nice, cozy quilt. This hasn't, you see, there was a square here, and then there were other squares. But it doesn't have a pattern, does it? Like this one does. Do you know what kind of a quilt that was called? What?
Calico?
Well, that's a good name.
Patchwork?
Oh, yeah, definitely, these are both patchwork quilts. But this had a special name because it didn't have any pattern. Didn't make sense. It was called a crazy quilt. That pattern were just all different shape pieces. That's a crazy quilt. Now this one's different. You see, this is silk. This was made for a young Quaker lady who was going to get married. And so this was going to go in her hope chest. Her friends made it for her. They started with one little square and added two more. Then they put two pieces here. Then they put two pieces here. And finally they built up the square. Do you know what pattern this is called? What's built like this long ago?
Layer.
How about a log cabin?
Yeah.
This is called a log cabin pattern quilt. And this is silk because it's very special. And you see, it is lined differently, but it has some padding in it. So the people had to, and they had sheep. They cut the wool from the sheep. They carded it and spun it and wove it into blankets for their beds. They had to make arrangements for themselves to keep warm. They just couldn't count on electricity. Now we have something else I would like to show you. Some tools that were used by early people. But this I want to show you. This was used by the farmer. Does anyone have any idea What?
A basket.
Well, could be. What do you think?
Something to cover.
It certainly did cover something,
Oh,
but something very unusual.
Horse's nest?
A horse's head, a horse's nose. And when the farmer plowed his corn, the horse couldn't reach down and nibble off the nice green tender parts. So this was fastened over the horse's nose, so he couldn't nibble. And there are tools over here used in a blacksmith shop, and an anvil where the blacksmith worked. He made horseshoes and put them on horses, and many times in early days used handmade nails. You just couldn't go up to the hardware store and buy a pound of nails. You made them yourself, and the horses had to be shod. Then this is one of our most interesting things. I need a volunteer, a boy. Oh, there are lots of them. This is a shaving horse, and it was the first labor-saving device. So you sit on the horse. Go ahead. That's right, just like you would sit on a horse. Now, what did the carpenter do? He had a draw knife. And he could take a piece of wood, and by putting his foot on that piece, press on. Now, what does that do? It holds it, and you could take this draw knife and shape it, couldn't you? You could make shingles, yeah. See how that works? You could sit down and do all these things. And you could make table legs with a round one. And so the carpenter found a way to sit down and save himself some time. Yes, you're doing that. Thank you. A shaving horse. One other thing we had up front. What do you think? What? Oh, that does look something like a piece of stone that you would use to sharpen knives, but it has a handle for some reason. Why?
A weight.
It's a weight? Do you want to prove that it's a weight? You got it? Oh, there you go. Well, I'll tell you. You think you know? What?
If there's a well or something, you could put on the shower to pull off the bucket that's in the well or something.
Oh, yes, you really could. You mean you have a weight and let that down and that would draw the bucket of water out? Yes, that would work. But this particular one was used in a different way. It was used to keep your feet warm. You put this in the oven of your stove or in the fireplace, and you got it real warm. Then you wrapped it in a blanket, and when you went out in your wagon or your sleigh, you put it in the bottom of the sleigh and put your feet on it. Kept your feet nice and warm during the winter. Or, in days gone by, churches didn't have any heat. And sometimes church service lasted 2 and 3 hours, and you were very glad to take a nice warm soapstone to church with you to keep your feet nice and warm. Now, these are the things that we have here in our building that tell us something about how the people lived who were here in Maple Shade before we had electricity. Aren't we lucky these days? We certainly are, because life is much easier. And I'm sure we wouldn't want to trade places with the boys and girls who lived 300 years ago, or 2, or even 1. I don't think we would. Now, we have time for some questions. Have any questions about anything you see? Yes?
These books over here, what were they used for?
Well, they're all textbooks and storybooks of one kind or another. They're quite old. and most unattractive compared with the books that we have today. Now here is Stories of Mother Goose. I'm sure you, when you were younger, you had stories of Mother Goose. But you see, the pictures are just black and white and yellow, and not anywhere near as attractive as your book. Our oldest book is this one. And you see it is quite ancient, and the print is very, very fine. It has a date of 1803. So you see that many years old. You're in 4th grade. Here's a 4th grade reader that used to be used in the Hague School. And this is what the 4th grade reader looked like. Doesn't look like yours, does it?
No.
And look, black and white pictures. And when you compare it with the beautiful books we have today, I'm sure that we feel very, very fortunate. We have. All right, any other questions? Yes.
What's that trophy?
Oh, it's a Maple Shade Community League Champs, 1961. I guess it's baseball. Yes.
What's that picture of?
This?
No, the other one, the small ones, the long ones.
Oh, these are the boys and girls who attended Steinhauer School back in 1922. This may have been the first class that attended this, first group of children that attended the Steinhauer School.
Doesn't have the class or school?
Well, this is the whole school. Yes.
How come the pictures in the books don't have any color?
They just hadn't learned to make books attractive yet. That's another thing that, as we go along, things improve, get better. Yes?
Were you the teacher?
Yes, it seems like a long time ago, but I was. Any other questions? Yes?
What is that back there?
What is what? Back where?
Shelves. Behind where? That man behind
Oh, the man? This? He was the first president. His name was Arthur N. Cutler. He was the first president of the Historical Society. Got it started. And Mrs. Shipley was vice president, and now she's president. Yes?
Behind these big albums, what are these charts?
They are the way the land was laid out in Maple Shade, the building lots.
So like
They're very, very old blueprints. See. Now, you folks are from North Fork Laney Road, and this is Mill Road, way back there. And you see, here's Alexander, and these are how you could select the lot that you wanted to buy for your home. And we have them for all sections of Maple Shade. Anything else? Yes? Oh, the necklaces? We've been collecting those because at the time of the bicentennial in 1976, everybody wanted to be patriotic. So all the ladies had a patriotic necklace that they wore. That's what they are. We were able to find 5 different ones. There's one made of red, white, and blue buttons. But everybody had something patriotic to wear around their neck on the bicentennial.
What are those two things in the window?
A carpenter would use these. See, this moves somehow so that you can make measurements. I guess it must be. No, it's screwed in there tight. And this also is something that he would have used to get an angle if he had to cut a piece of wood in a certain way. Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for coming. Hope you have enjoyed your little program, and maybe you'll come back and visit us sometime when we're open.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am Mrs. Summers from the Fort Landing Road School, and with me today are
Melissa Martin, Michelle Fournier, Lisa Cassiger, Nick Giannini, Jennifer Kelly, Barry Stesis, Lee, Maria Santor, Jake Cannon, Jessica Stubbs, Kimberly Renninger, Michelle Kelly, Walter Wilson, Jennifer Shimon, Alex Fedor, TJ Taylor, Robert Roulette, Greg Lucia, and Julie Workman, Amishi Padian, Carlos Walker.
And today we're here to visit the little schoolhouse, and we'd like to share our visit with you. You want that again?
You want to do it again?
Yeah.
I'm Mrs. Summers from the Fort Landing Road School. Our fourth grade is here today to visit the little red schoolhouse. With us are
Melissa Martin, Michelle Fournier, Lisa Cassiger, Nick Giannini, Jennifer Kelly, Barry Stesis, Lee, Maria Santor, Lee Carey, Jessica Stubbs, Kimberly Renninger, Michelle Kelly, Walter Wilson, Alex Fedor, Albert Roulette, Amisha Upadhyay, Carlos Walker, Jennifer Shimana, T.G. Taylor, Greg Galicia, Jimmy Coo, Jeremy Workman.
Okay, are we all here?
I'm Mrs. Hurwitz, and we're all here to visit the Little Red Schoolhouse. Please come visit it. It's quite a feat here to see how things were in the olden days. Thank you.